Okay, so now this is the real stream. The other stream I didn't have audio on my video that I was reviewing, so that didn't happen. Okay, so let me make sure I do this right. I hit share screen, and I'm going to put the link in. Okay, for if you want to join the stream, it's whatever. Okay, so I think I got everything. Let me put the link. Copy to clipboard. I got this. Okay. So I'm gonna just start like I didn't redo this. Okay, so here we go.
The worldview discussions space can be so combative. And when atheists and Christians come up with lists of questions that they don't think the other side can answer, those questions usually aren't genuine. I've never made a list like that, although I've responded to some. Here, I hope my atheist interlocutors will consider these questions deeply without giving glib answers. These aren't meant to be gotcha questions, though I'm not asking for no reason. I expect you will have answers, and I want to hear what the most sincere among you have to say. With that, here are my 10 questions for atheists.
What I was saying earlier was I just don't think that there's that much entailed by atheism. In fact, there's not that much entailed by theism, right? Like, if I said that, like, well, theism doesn't entail that God would command anything, would it? You know, so there's that, right? Like, so like if your whole morality is like based on what God would command of you, theism doesn't entail there would be commands. But like, I mean, to be fair to him, he's talking about Christianity. And of course, Christianity makes a whole lot more claims than like, someone that might think that there is like a first mover. But yeah, I mean, like, not intentional states. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like there's like a mind out there. No, not even. I mean, teleology. So like, they're not. There's not even design necessarily design. It could have been that the universe existed alongside with like some mind, and there's no like causal relationship because there are no desires, and there's just like no intent, like the sort of intentions that would like creative intentions, like those wouldn't actions is what I'm trying to say. I guess there wouldn't be action. So you could have a universe with like a god in which that god doesn't act and it just thinks or something like that. Now that's prima facie coherent, but I suppose there are issues in that. But there's just not much entailed by these things right now. Christianity, of course, makes a lot more claims. So let's maybe I should be a little bit more charitable. Christianity makes a ton of claims about at least how the world is, what we should do. But I know for certain atheism doesn't make a lot of claims. Other than that, there's this mind that you say is omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, whatever, insert God making properties like that. There's that. But in terms of like morality and stuff, like I just don't think there's a lot of entailments. But let's see what he has to say.
What facts about reality that you and I agree are real facts about the way the world is does your worldview account for, but my Christianity doesn't account for, or at least doesn't account for well? And for those of you that would point out atheism isn't a worldview, I'm talking about your worldview that includes atheism. I can't think of any.
Yeah, so he's granting, okay, like if you don't consider atheism to be a worldview, then I'm just asking about your worldview. Then he's just asking any non-Christians, right? This is like, he's just asking for you non-Christians out there, what are your answers to these fundamental philosophical questions? What does atheism have to do with it? So so it should be 10 questions for non-Christians, right? I mean, I guess there should be like there's might be overlap, with Islam and Christianity in terms of morals, or I don't know. But even then, I don't know. It's just uh, okay. I think he's just asking people that are not Christians, like, how do you account for these things that Christianity makes claims about? Sure.
Christianity accounts for evil, suffering, the existence of other religions, including supernatural events in those other religions, science, and differences among different denominations of Christianity. But I can think of many things that the most common worldviews that include atheism don't answer as well as I think Christianity does. Like universal supernatural claims, universal religious experiences, free will, morality, near death experiences, beauty, the rapid expansion of the early church, the events surrounding the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth.
Okay, so after, yeah, I mean, like he just, I thought he just granted that, like, okay, if you don't consider atheism to be a worldview, then what's your view on these things? But then right here, he's making claims of, well, how atheism, we have answers to these questions, or at least we address these questions. How does your view address these questions on it? How does atheism address these questions? But to reiterate, I mean, okay, yeah, like the the proposition that God does not exist doesn't say anything about morality, right? And the proposition that God exists doesn't really say anything about morality either. So, but once again, we're talking about Christianity versus non-Christianity, it seems like. So let's continue.
And our shared longing for purpose and meaning. So, what is it that Christianity doesn't answer as well as your worldview? If your definition of atheism is merely that it's a lack of belief in God and you're just waiting to be convinced, but then you speak of him as though he's in some way synonymous with Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, or fairies, doesn't that at least send the message to your listeners that you actually believe that there is no God? After all, these are entities and beings that you likely believe do not exist. And if your response is that you merely lack a belief in Santa Claus and don't actively believe that he does not exist, doesn't that sound a little disingenuous, honestly?
Okay, this I hate this conversation, man. Like I'm pulling out my hair. I hate the lactheism atheism terminological dispute, and I just did a video on it that I deleted, and I thought I went over it. Now I have to talk about it again. Oh, guys, guess what? If you're debating on definition of a term, there's not real disagreement, except for maybe like how do people use the term? Sure. Okay. Let's say people use a certain term this way 90% and 90% of interactions. Okay. It doesn't mean that you should adopt it. I mean, like, it just depends on your goals. It's such a horrible conversation, guys, right? Okay, but I'll engage with it. I just think it's useful to say that atheism is the rejection of God's existence. That the idea is that I take to be true that God does not exist. Okay. Now, if you want to define it otherwise, sure, right? We can establish our terms. Oh, I hate. Okay, I just have to get through this, right? The lactheism stuff. It always bothers me. It really does because it's such a boring conversation. Because in the end, it just becomes something like, what's useful? Like it's like, is a hammer used for, nailing things into walls, or is it used as a paperweight? That's like the kind of discussion that is, right? You're like debating on how we should use thing like tools, right? Well, you're debating about what's useful. You're not for those that think there's a real definition of things. I mean, not just maybe you should. I'm not even going to address it here, right? But it's just, look, definitions are useful, certain definitions are not, and then you can have a conversation about it. But it's like having a conversation about what's the use of this highlighter, right? Is it I'm using it to make a point, right? I mean, or should it only be used to highlight things, right? I mean, are we really having this discussion right now? What what's the okay? Let's move on.
When atheism becomes a part of someone's worldview, they typically change their positions on other issues like abortion, sexual morality, and a number of other things. I actually have several videos of well known atheists saying that there's nothing wrong with prostitution, that they hope their children don't save themselves until marriage, and that sex workers should be put up on a pedestal no different than the military. I didn't use those here because I didn't want to seem combative to individuals, specifically the individuals who made those statements. But even if you didn't become an atheist just so you could sin, and I believe you, do you at least understand why those moves could send that message to people who might say that to you?
Okay, this is like an interesting question, not philosophically. Okay, because philosophically, right, you could be pro-life, you could be anti-gay, right? You can be minimal government, whatever, right? Take the normal right-wing agenda, be a Christian, and then deconvert and still hold to all those views, like I did, right? I think that the morality of abortion links strongly in favor of pro-life people. I do. Now, I think that ultimately becomes an unsubstantive debate, but I totally get pro-life people more so than I get a lot of the typical pro-choice people. Like all the arguments for pro-choice that you see on a surface level, like social media level, are just horrible. Now, that might be some kind of bias that I have that I see. I mean, presumably they're horrible arguments on both sides, but no, I sympathize with pro-life people. I really do, right? Like limited government and all these other things, right? Like, yeah, I get that. I just, what does that have to do with being a Christian? You know, sex before marriage, okay. Um, yeah, I could see why. I mean, if you just define or understand Christianity as forbidding that sort of thing, okay, yeah, sure, but um, there are certain political issues that I think you can either change your concept of Christianity, right, to where like it seems like you could be a Christian and be pro-choice, right? I mean, I met them. Are they just no longer Christian? And then again, we're like debating about terms. What does it mean to be a Christian? Um, and we could potentially be talking past each other. But like, I deconverted about 2 years ago, and a lot of my social right leaning stuff, like I get all of that. All right, I didn't automatically drop it, and so I mean, there's clear counterexamples of this. So what does it have to do with atheism? I mean, I think that's a sociological, psychological question, right? If someone deconverts, what explains why they suddenly become pro-choice and suddenly pro LGBT, all Black Lives Matter, all that. I mean, I think it's just sociological, psychological stuff. It seems like you can be pro all those things and be a Christian in some sense, right? In some meaningful, useful sense. But I don't know.
If it's a lack of belief sort of atheism, what is it? Is it 50-50, 60-40, 75-25? And at what point do you feel disingenuous saying that you merely lack a belief as opposed to leaning towards, I believe that God does not exist?
Sorry, I heard lacteus and I stopped paying attention. Okay. I mean, like I said, if you didn't hear me, I hate that conversation about criticisms of lactheism and all that. It was just I don't even if I heard it, I'm sorry. I'm gonna skip that question.
Now, I know we've all got our talking points, but I want you to struggle to be as sincere with yourself as you can right now. Doesn't it bother you a little bit that when we come to talk about the origins of the universe, and if there's a multiverse, the origin of that too, that the only real options you've got besides God is a past infinite universe, which is impossible, or the universe coming to exist uncaused out of nothing, or something far less clear than even those? It seems that for any worldview that includes atheism, there's a massive blind spot when it comes to the origin of the universe. And all the attempts to try and circumvent that problem seem desperate and at least far less likely than theism. My question isn't just what do you typically say about this, because I'm well aware of the responses. My question is simply this: when you step away from the debate mode that it's so easy for us all to get into online, doesn't this issue destabilize you a little bit? It seems to fit really poorly with any worldview that includes atheism.
Okay, so that's a big question. Let me level with you, Braxton. Okay, the origin of the universe is, at least this is just my personal psychology. Okay, I don't even know. I don't know what this has to do with philosophy, but yeah, it bothers me. Like I mean, some people like the mystery. I personally don't. I would, if I could, you know, support the idea that everything is designed, which, there's there's that, but support the idea that God created the universe, I would probably, like, I feel more comfortable. But um now that I don't think that's a tenable position, it seems like there are two other options, right? Either the universe has always existed, or the universe began to exist without a cause. But if you think about it, like, okay, so let me step out of my psychology for a second. You have three options with respect to the origin of the universe. You have three options. Okay, you either think that it's always existed, you either think that it began without a cause, or you think that it began with a cause. I think, to me, those are, somebody can correct me, but that's the three options, right? Let's As to which one is unintuitive, I don't think that's an interesting philosophical question, right? I find all of them unintuitive. I find all of them kind of scary. Okay, so what? Like, I have anxiety about that. Okay, what follows from that? Should I revise my views? No, right? I don't think so, right? If the idea that, like, the universe always existing is somehow unintuitive, what what does that mean for how what I should believe? What I should believe. And when we're talking about what we should believe, we're talking about justification. And intuitions, to me, are not justifications. They're just like these kind of explanatory mechanisms for me. Like, oh, I have an intuition that X, so I'm going to believe that X. That's If I think that's an inference, I'm in irrational territory. But if I'm just saying, look, I believe this because it's intuitive, and I understand I'm not making an inference, I just simply believe it, and it's not like irrational, or nor is it rational. It's just kind of like a non-rational thing that's going on, right? But, like, yeah, okay, so the universe didn't have a creator. What happens next? It's either that I think that the universe began without a cause, um, has always existed. I mean, I haven't really entertained the idea of the universe beginning with a kind of non-personal cause. I don't even know what that looks like, but still, sure, let's grant something like that as a possibility. So I guess there are four possibilities. I mean, they're all strange to me, right? I just don't think that I should really be motivated by that in terms philosophically. LPP, which conservative concepts did I reject ultimately? No, I'm just going in like complete, like, I don't know mode, right? I have like, I just, one thing I do know though is that from being, I used to be a conservative, or I am somewhat conservative, but like, I know that whatever political left, or, I'm talking about like the AOCs and the Elizabeth Warrens and the Bernie Sanders, like, I don't really think they have any good answers to these problems in society. But I don't really think the right does either. I mean, then there's a question of who could make it worse. I really don't know, right? I'm fine with just saying I don't know, you know. But so there's not really a lot of rejection that I have about these views. I have my intuitions, but I just discussed how useful those are in terms of being justified in a belief. But yeah, I'm fine with talking about it sometime. But let's continue the video.
Of the arguments for God's existence, is there one that to you seems more interesting than the rest? Is there one that for you actually does weigh in favor of theism? Which one?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think all the arguments are interesting to me, but that's because I'm interested in the arguments. Like, I love studying the ontological argument and all sorts of stuff. Like, I'm just academically interested. Now, as to which ones support theism more, it's just so hard to say. I mean, I'm sort of on the side that, like, none of these arguments really work, but I think the argument for reason is like kind of perplexing, to where, like, that argument, the conclusion of that argument, or some of the ideas in that argument might cause me to believe in God, but it's not going to be justified. I mean, look, I don't know where reasons come from. I mean, if they come from non-rational, non-reasonable things, there's not. It's going to be. It seems like it's going to be kind of random as to how that happens. There's not going to be like a principled explanation, like a theory, like a scientific theory of it. And that's like complicated philosophy stuff. But like that, yeah, that's kind of weird. But that goes back to the way I responded to my last question. That yeah, it's unintuitive that like these things, like that I have a mind without any kind of like principle explanation. Okay, but should that be a reason to believe in God? Could God explain why I have a mind rather than not having a mind? I mean, like, sure. If we're granting the concept is coherent, sure, that could be the case. But why is that more of a reason to not to believe that it just occurred, kind of in a contingent, brutish way? But I'm looking at the chat. Anyways, yeah, let's go on.
Most atheists I've met humbly admit that they don't think they can have absolute certainty about much of anything. But what they want from the Christian is a demonstration that God exists or that Christianity is true. Well, when we offer the reasons to believe that we do have, those are typically deemed not good enough. So, what sort of evidence, if any, would be enough to convince you? Do you know? And since it's often a conversation stopper, let's take experimental reproducibility off the table, since that's not even always necessary for science.
I feel like I'm going to repeat myself here. The last three questions, I feel like I'm repeating myself. I mean, I don't think there can be. I don't think the notion of evidence doesn't really apply to God. I think, right? I think I'm pretty confident, right, that evidence is kind of like a thing that could disconfirm the existence or the truth of a proposition, right? Like that in terms of what you could observe, verify. So what could verify or disconfirm God? I don't even like anything okay, look. If I saw Jesus' resurrection, I just might come to the belief that God exists. But how is that evidence for God if it's the case that we construe evidence in that way, right? Like that I just did. That like it's not like if Jesus didn't resurrect that there wouldn't be God, right? So Jesus' resurrection is actually not evidence in that sense, right? It's not confirmatory, nor because if it didn't happen, it would be disconfirmatory, right? The notion of evidence is that it's either confirmatory or disconfirmatory. So I guess a quick example for those that don't understanding me, the proposition that there's a horse in my bathroom, okay, there's evidence for that, right? There's things that can confirm it or disconfirm it. So if I open the door and I didn't see a furry large creature that had hooves, it would disconfirm it. It would falsify it, right? There's no evidence for it. In fact, there's evidence that what would I expect if there wasn't a horse in my bathroom? So if I opened the door and I didn't see such things, right? But God doesn't work that way, right? Like if God was in the room, what should I expect in the room? Because it seems like any kind of observation is consistent with it. Any empirical observation is consistent with it. So we need to differentiate between two questions, Braxton. Two questions, right? What would cause me to believe in God? Well, all sorts of things. All sorts of things, right? If I saw Jesus resurrect, that would cause me to believe. But that doesn't entail that it's evidence. So what would count as evidence for God? I'm saying nothing. No observation can count as evidence for God because everything's consistent with it. Everything, right? There's nothing that can disconfirm it. So the second that you point to something as evidence for God means that if that did not happen, it would disconfirm the hypothesis. But Christians don't believe everything. Everything that they point as evidence for God, if it didn't happen, that wouldn't disconfirm God. So that's why I don't think the term even applies. Right. So look, I don't blame Christians for like look, they look at the historicity of Christ and let's grant all the claims. I don't know anything about it, right? Let's just grant everything, right? That the minimal facts that these people present, like that Jesus died, definitely died, that people saw him after his death, right? That a lot of these people were martyred for that. If that causes you to believe, I have no problem with it. But why would it be evidence? Because if none of that happened, it's not like God doesn't exist. Okay? So, in essence and summary, there can't be evidence for God, but there could be plenty of things that could cause me to believe. And I don't really blame people that because I'm that way, right? If I saw things, I might be caused to believe.
To what extent did social and moral issues start you down the path toward your atheism? That is to say, the typical Christian or religious views on sexuality, gender, rights, and acts and commands of God in the Old Testament. It seems that many deconversion stories online begin with, or at least include, LGBT issues, purity culture, or hell as instrumental in the deconversion process. It strikes me that what should matter most is the truth and not what we might prefer that the truth were. I honestly wonder how much those issues and ones like them motivate the deconversion rather than all this talk about evidence.
I'm kind of look, I think that a lot of people are kind of wrong in these conversations when they reflect and say, "Oh yeah, I believe that because of rational reasons. That's how I came to believe these things." I'll be honest, right? I don't even I'm guessing that I deconverted primarily for non-rational reasons. I'm guessing. I think that's perfectly plausible. I barely remember. I have like the memory of a fish, what a goldfish or whatever this phrase is. Look, the point is that like I was going through stuff in my life, right? I was um I made new friends who were hard, staunch atheists. Did that have to do with my deconversion? Absolutely. So here's my advice: if you're a Christian and listen, the 7 years out there, if you're a Christian, listen to this, right? Your friends are likely to influence what you believe. If I had stuck with Christians, if I had continued to go to church and all of that, I probably would still be a Christian. Yeah, so I'm perfectly fine with saying that like what explains my beliefs now, at least initially, my deconversion initially, were non-rational reasons. They're non-rational explanations. My society, my friends, my sexuality, my whatever. Sure. Okay. So why am I saying this? Because now all I care about are the arguments. Right. Now, look, I'm not trying to be arrogant here and say that I have like a definitive that like everyone that doesn't have my views are wrong, right? I'm actually really, really interested in having these conversations, but only because of the arguments, right? I'm not interested in preaching or shouting down Christians that they believe in a sky daddy. That's just boring to me. But I'm really interested in the arguments and the sort of justifications behind both views. And I think one of the main reasons now why I don't go back to Christianity is because of a lot of the philosophical stuff. Okay. But like, yeah, I would suspect that many people don't have justifications for the beliefs. This includes atheists. Like I hang out with some YouTube atheists, and I'm not. Some of them are justified in their atheism, I think, but most of them are not. Look, I can agree with an atheist God doesn't exist, but guess what? That does not predict that we both know it, right? Let's say I know. Okay, that means I have a justification for my belief that God does not exist. And I agree with an atheist doesn't mean that they know. We just we just have the same belief. So, like, if I talk to an atheist and we both agree that God does not exist, and then um, I cite my reasons, I give like the problem of evil, and let's pretend that the problem of evil is a justification for my Christian friends out there. Let's just pretend. And then they said, well, because there's no evidence that God exists. I don't consider that to be a justification, guys. If you're an atheist and you go around saying that you're justified in your belief that God does not exist because there's no evidence for it, that's like you need to revive. You don't know that God doesn't exist. You don't know that. You have no just. That's not a justification. And I can get into why. I'm not really here to do that right now. But we agree, right? So I think most people are like this. Most people don't have justifications for these sorts of views, and So we can just give a sort of narrative explanation about why they believe, and certainly that applies to me. It applies to Christians, it applies to atheists, it applies to everyone. Right? Probably, Braxton, right? I mean, I don't think any of the arguments for theism works. So it's either that he's irrational or there's something else that causes him to believe, which is not necessarily irrational. Okay, I'm gonna continue the video. It's almost over.
Can you name the last 3 academic books you read by theists on the subject? How long ago did you read them? Or is most of your understanding of apologetics and atheism from non-scholarly internet sources, pop-level books, and, let's face it, YouTube videos? And be honest with yourself about this. Anyone can Google up a list of books and paste them in the comments section. But I want to know, are you getting the best from the other side? Let's finish with a
I'm right here with him. Make sure you have. I think that you should look into the best of your opponents. But I just bought these 2 books because I haven't really read Plan and Ga. I've only heard used auxiliary secondary sources, but I think Plan and Ga is brilliant, right? I mean, I might disagree, but you can learn a lot from people that disagree with you, and I think you should get the best of that position, right? Yeah, atheists out there, don't get your just if you go to Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and all of them that for your justification, you're not going to get any, right? In the same way that if you go to certain Ray Comfort, okay, for what could possibly count as justification for theism, that's just you're gonna do yourself a disservice. Okay. Look for this. I mean, if you're interested, look for the strongest positions, right? If you're not interested, then yeah, just if Ray Comfort satisfies your belief and that Christians don't have any justification and you're just not interested, just stay ignorant, whatever. Is that the was that
pretty
the
common one. If you found out today to your satisfaction that Christianity were true, would you accept God's authority, repent of your sins, and trust Jesus as your king?
I don't know if I could. I would just have to be a different person. I mean, this happened to me, right? Before I deconverted, I completely stopped following Christianity. But I thought it was true. I just wanted to do my own thing. So I don't know. In the past, I've kind of failed at following Christianity despite me believing. And I was talking to a Christian apologist, Tim Stratton. I interviewed him, so you could watch that video. Towards the end, I think it's chapter Danny's view on Christianity. I think the hard part of Christianity for me is just following it. If on a particular interpretation, my interpretation of Christianity is really difficult to follow. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Who cares? But the point is that, yeah, I don't know if Braxton's interpretation, on Braxton's interpretation, it'd be very difficult for me to follow. Could I do it? Maybe, maybe not. I really don't know. I mean, there was a point in my life where I was successful. I think relatively successful at following it, and then where I wasn't, I kind of just couldn't follow it. But it's a fairly uninteresting question philosophically speaking. But Braxton is doing more than just doing philosophy. I suppose he's trying to win people over, right? Trying to convince and save people. So I get that. I'm surprised no one joined the channel. I think did I not post the thing? Oh well. I think that concludes this review. I kind of honestly before today I'd not even seen any of this. So I kind of just willy-nilly opened it up and decided to live stream our response. So my response, replies to each of these questions are not carefully crafted. It was just kind of like this snap of my fingers response. So I don't know what the hell I said the last 34 minutes, but hopefully it's somewhat illuminating, if not interesting. But that's it for me, I think, for right now. Y'all take care.